To a wonderful visit, and yes, indeed, I do remember my visit fondly in 2008 and the opportunity to get to see some of your country firsthand.
我也非常期待这一次美好的旅程。的确，2008年那一次的旅程，我的记忆也是很美好。当时有非常多的机会能够第一次认识这个国家。
You are so accurate when you mention the shared values that we have, loving freedom, loving democracy. And it is important indeed that freedom-loving nations support Taiwan as they seek to preserve their independence and their freedom.
蔡总统刚刚说的非常的正确，我们两国有共同的价值，我们都热爱着自由以及民主，而且热爱自由民主的国家应当都要支持台湾，让台湾能够继续保持自己的独立以及自由。
And I'm looking forward to a conversation where we can discuss those issues.
我也期待接下来我们在双边会谈的时候，能够再讨论触及这些议题。
In Tennessee, we have much of our nation's auto manufacturing, and you mentioned the semiconductor issue. That is something that is very important to us.
我们田纳西州是美国汽车制造的重镇，刚刚总统也提到半导体，对我们田纳西州而言，半导体也十分的重要。
We appreciate the fact that so many of our auto manufacturers do call Tennessee home, and that creates good paying jobs for our citizens. So the supply chain issues that surround our critical supply chain and that infrastructure are vitally important to us.
我也非常乐见有这么多的制造业者、汽车业者都在田纳西州创造了很多薪水优渥的工作给予我们的公民。那当然，我们因此非常重视供应链的议题，以及我们市场基础建设的议题。
We also appreciate the Select USA program and the opportunity for us to partner in how we make certain that our manufacturers have the supply chain stability that they need in order to supply automobiles for the U.S.
那我也非常乐见我们有选择美国这样子的一个平台，这个平台可以给我们的伙伴许多的契机，让我们一起确保我们的制造业者都能够有稳定的供应链，能够确保我们能够稳定的供应汽车给美国市场。
And thank you again for your time. Thank you to your team for helping to accommodate us, and we look forward to continuing to help and support Taiwan as they push forward as an independent nation.
再次感谢蔡总统以及你们的团队拨冗来接待我们。我也期待说，接下来我们会持续的帮助台湾，让台湾能够保持自己的独立自由。
Thank you.
谢谢布雷伯恩参议员。
架构，共同来建立高标准的经济规范，一起创造区域的稳定以及繁荣。
At the same time, it is our wish to be further integrated into the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity and other regional economic cooperation architecture. We hope to jointly establish high-standard economic norms and together build regional stability and prosperity.
最后，我要再一次表达对Senator Blackburn 到台湾来访问，我也预祝此行访问顺利，谢谢。
In closing, I wish Senator Blackburn a successful trip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you so much for receiving us today. We are so appreciative of your time and of your kindness in inviting us to join you.
总统阁下，非常感谢您热情的接待我，并且拨冗跟我见面。
I am looking forward to a wonderful visit, and yes, indeed, I do remember my visit fondly in 2008 and the opportunity to get to see some of your country firsthand.
我也非常期待这一次美好的旅程。的确，2008年那一次的旅程，我的记忆也是很美好。当时有非常多的机会能够第一次认识这个国家。
You are so accurate when you mention the shared values that we have, loving freedom, loving democracy. And it is important indeed that freedom-loving nations support Taiwan as they seek to preserve their independence and their freedom.
蔡总统刚刚说的非常的正确，我们两国有共同的价值，我们都热爱着自由以及民主，而且热爱自由民主的国家应当都要支持台湾，让台湾能够继续保持自己的独立以及自由。
And I'm looking forward to a conversation where we can discuss those issues.
我也期待接下来我们在双边会谈的时候，能够再讨论触及这些议题。
In Tennessee, we have much of our nation's auto manufacturing, and you mentioned the semiconductor issue. That is something that is very important to us.
我们田纳西州是美国汽车制造的重镇，刚刚总统也提到半导体，对我们田纳西州而言，半导体也十分的重要。
We appreciate the fact that so many of our auto manufacturers do call Tennessee home, and that creates good paying jobs for our citizens. So the supply chain issues that surround our critical supply chain and that infrastructure are vitally important to us.
我也非常乐见有这么多的制造业者、汽车业者都在田纳西州创造了很多薪水优渥的工作给予我们的公民。那当然，我们因此非常重视供应链的议题，以及我们市场基础建设的议题。
We also appreciate the Select USA program and the opportunity for us to partner in how we make certain that our manufacturers have the supply chain stability that they need in order to supply automobiles for the U.S.
那我也非常乐见我们有选择美国这样子的一个平台，这个平台可以给我们的伙伴许多的契机，让我们一起确保我们的制造业者都能够有稳定的供应链，能够确保我们能够稳定的供应汽车给美国市场。
And thank you again for your time. Thank you to your team for helping to accommodate us, and we look forward to continuing to help and support Taiwan as they push forward as an independent nation.
再次感谢蔡总统以及你们的团队拨冗来接待我们。我也期待说，接下来我们会持续的帮助台湾，让台湾能够保持自己的独立自由。
Thank you.
谢谢布雷伯恩参议员。
架构，共同来建立高标准的经济规范，一起创造区域的稳定以及繁荣。
At the same time, it is our wish to be further integrated into the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity and other regional economic cooperation architecture. We hope to jointly establish high-standard economic norms and together build regional stability and prosperity.
最后，我再一次表达对Senator Blackburn 到台湾来访问，我也预祝此行访问顺利，谢谢。
In closing, I wish Senator Blackburn a successful trip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you so much for receiving us today. We are so appreciative of your time and of your kindness in inviting us to join you.
总统阁下，非常感谢您热情的接待我，并且拨冗跟我见面。
I am looking forward to a wonderful visit, and yes, indeed, I do remember my visit fondly in 2008 and the opportunity to get to see some of your country firsthand.
我也非常期待这一次美好的旅程。的确，2008年那一次的旅程，我的记忆也是很美好。当时有非常多的机会能够第一次认识这个国家。
You are so accurate when you mention the shared values that we have, loving freedom, loving democracy. And it is important indeed that freedom-loving nations support Taiwan as they seek to preserve their independence and their freedom.
蔡总统刚刚说的非常的正确，我们两国有共同的价值，我们都热爱着自由以及民主，而且热爱自由民主的国家应当都要支持台湾，让台湾能够继续保持自己的独立以及自由。
And I'm looking forward to a conversation where we can discuss those issues.
我也期待接下来我们在双边会谈的时候，能够再讨论触及这些议题。
In Tennessee, we have much of our nation's auto manufacturing, and you mentioned the semiconductor issue. That is something that is very important to us.
我们田纳西州是美国汽车制造的重镇，刚刚总统也提到半导体，对我们田纳西州而言，半导体也十分的重要。
We appreciate the fact that so many of our auto manufacturers do call Tennessee home, and that creates good paying jobs for our citizens. So the supply chain issues that surround our critical supply chain and that infrastructure are vitally important to us.
我也非常乐见有这么多的制造业者、汽车业者都在田纳西州创造了很多薪水优渥的工作给予我们的公民。那当然，我们因此非常重视供应链的议题，以及我们市场基础建设的议题。
We also appreciate the Select USA program and the opportunity for us to partner in how we make certain that our manufacturers have the supply chain stability that they need in order to supply automobiles for the U.S.
那我也非常乐见我们有选择美国这样子的一个平台，这个平台可以给我们的伙伴许多的契机，让我们一起确保我们的制造业者都能够有稳定的供应链，能够确保我们能够稳定的供应汽车给美国市场。
And thank you again for your time. Thank you to your team for helping to accommodate us, and we look forward to continuing to help and support Taiwan as they push forward as an independent nation.
再次感谢蔡总统以及你们的团队拨冗来接待我们。我也期待说，接下来我们会持续的帮助台湾，让台湾能够保持自己的独立自由。
Thank you.
谢谢布雷伯恩参议员。
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to MOFA for today's press briefing with Foreign Minister Dr. Joseph Wu. I'm sure you all know that the minister is more than happy to meet international press, to envoys for Taiwan. So without further ado, I would like to invite the minister to make a few remarks. Minister, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be able to resume this regular press briefings to the International Media Corps this morning. We have done that quite regularly before, and I think it's quite useful for the journalists who stationed here in Taiwan. And I have full intention to continue these very good practices. And it's quite bad that we were interrupted by COVID. But since we are more or less getting used to the COVID situation, and therefore I would like to resume these regular briefings. And in addition to my briefings, we are also planning to invite other government ministries to join the briefings in the future, in the near future. I know many of you are interested not just in our foreign policy or in our diplomatic efforts. You might be interested in cross-strait relations, our economic development, our security situation, and etc. And I will try to make arrangement in order to serve better the journalists now stationed in Taiwan. Now we have quite a few international journalists in Taiwan right now. So providing services to the international journalists becomes our responsibility, and we'll be very happy to do this service for the international journalists here in Taiwan. And we will let you know ahead of time when the next press briefings will be and who will do the briefings, other than myself. I hope I can do it in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also bring in some other senior officials over here, and we'll let you know ahead of time concerning the timing, the topic, and the persons doing the press briefings. How's that? Sounds good, okay? I think we can start now. Even though I don't have a prepared statement, but I think you have been focusing on the cross-strait tension or Chinese military threat against Taiwan. And whatever topics related to this will be welcomed by me. And if the answers coming from me is out in the open, it'll be welcomed. But after the open press round, if you have anything specifically that needs to have backgrounder, for example, anonymous or off the record type of discussion, I'll be happy to do so as well. I think the purpose is very, very simple. Is to provide good services to the international journalists to station in Taiwan.
Thank you very much, Minister. Before proceed to QA, I'd like to quickly acknowledge the presence of our MOFA's spokeswoman, Madame Joanne Oh as well. Thank you, Joanne. So as a good tradition, usually the first two questions would come from the president of the TFCC. So may I invite Mr. William Young for your questions, please.
Hi, Minister and Joanne and Catherine. Thank you so much for organizing this briefing. I guess I wanted to start out by basically asking the question that a lot of the international community has been focusing on, which is the rising Chinese military threat against Taiwan and the responding international support that has followed suit. We see in recent weeks that a lot of different countries' parliamentary delegations have expressed their interest of coming to Taiwan. But in your opinion, when China is trying to continue to warn these countries for the consequences of trying to come and visit Taiwan, how would Taiwan try to respond to these show of goodwill? Because we know that Taiwan always it's kind of like caught in a very difficult position whenever any international organization or delegation is hoping to come over here.
Thank you very much, Willie, for that outstanding question. For those who cover Taiwan for a long time, like all of you, understand the Chinese motivation on Taiwan. What China wants to do is to cut Taiwan off the international connections. So in the future, if China wants to attack Taiwan, there will be no support for Taiwan. So this is a Chinese motivation, and because of that motivation, they try to stop Taiwan's friends from coming to Taiwan, or trying to stop international friends from showing support to Taiwan. And every time there's a strong show of support to Taiwan, especially coming from the non-diplomatic allies, the Chinese pressure has always been there. What China or to coerce those people from coming to Taiwan and show their support, or from showing support from their countries. So this is the Chinese motivation. But you can understand Taiwan. We not only is an economic powerhouse, we are also a responsible international player. And Taiwan has been seen as a force for good in the world. So connecting with the international community has always been our mission, especially the mission of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we will not stop making friends just because of the Chinese threat against Taiwan. By the same token, I don't see that there's any reason for international friends to show their support for Taiwan just because of the Chinese coercion. We won't bow to pressure. And this line has been repeated by the president, repeated by me, and repeated by other senior officials. And I think the regular people here in Taiwan will also tell you this. Even though Chinese trying to coerce us internationally, trying to coerce our friends, to stop our friends from coming in, it won't work, because we will continue to make friends, and because the international community will continue to show their support for Taiwan. And in contrast to what China has been trying to do, for example, because of the military pressure that China has demonstrated against Taiwan, there are more people than ever who wanted to come and show their support in Taiwan. And you have seen quite a few already. And I can tell you that there will be more. A lot of international friends have already told us that they are very interested in coming to Taiwan. And the purpose is very simple, just to show solidarity with Taiwan, and we appreciate that very much. You have any follow-up?
Follow-up, please. And I guess like a lot of these visits seem to bring a lot of symbolic importance to the democratic world's support, and also for Taiwan. But at the same time, like from your perspective as Taiwan's foreign minister, are there any concrete steps that Taipei wants to take in order to actually deepen the substantial actual ties with different parts of the world? We see some efforts already in Central and Eastern Europe in recent years, but like, are there any other more, I guess, like concrete steps that you think Taipei is or plans to take in order to actually deepen ties in different parts of the world?
That's a very good question. I think there's a lot of discussions on the visitors coming to Taiwan, whether they are coming here only for symbolic reasons, or whether there's any substance to their visit. If you have a better understanding of the Taiwan's international standings, or our interactions with the international community, very often symbolism can be substantive. For example, China is trying to cut us off from the international support. So for the Taiwanese people, seeing the international support is very important, and this is the way to keep us going. This is a way to keep the Taiwanese people in high morale. So that might be symbolic, but it has more substance to anything else. And moreover, we are also looking for more opportunities to engage other countries on economic matters, on people-to-people exchanges, things like that. and very often they are very successful. For example, you mentioned about the Central and Eastern European countries. The economic interaction with these countries are going great, and we will pursue our substantive relations, economic relations or political relations or other type of relations with Central and Eastern European countries to make sure that they look at Taiwan not just for symbolic reason, but also for substantive reason.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, William. As also a good tradition, I would like to invite the rotating secretary of the Taipei Japanese Association, Mr. Suzuki, for your 2 questions. 铃木支局长，请。
你好，部长好，我叫日本读卖协会的铃木。我刚才也部长谈到，但是进一步想听具体的事情。但是美国的佩洛西议长的来访，虽然带来了台美双方展现友好的契机。但也引来中国的强烈反弹。可以预见，中国可能对台湾外交关系打压力度。请问台湾外交上已经3个礼拜已经受到某些打压，还有预估将来跟友邦关系以及参与国际组织的活动会受到怎样阻碍？如果有受到影响，外交部将采取怎样的作为？
非常谢谢林木先生刚刚的这个问题。For those who don't understand Chinese, I think there's an interpreter doing the interpretation for you. But for the questions raised in Chinese, the custom over here is to answer in Chinese. 所以我就用中文来回答。我想刚刚提出来的这个问题的确是非常的重要。那如果说我们再回头一点点时间看佩洛西议长来台湾的这个事情的话，我刚刚已经提到，就是说我们台湾在国际社会上面需要这个国际的支持，不管是美国的支持、日本的支持，或者是其他国家的支持比如像最近就有2位日本的重量级的国会议员在台湾，那这个就是对台湾表达的支持，那我们都非常高兴，也非常的感谢。那还有其他的国家认为说台湾值得支持的，不管是在道义上面，或者是说在实质的议题上面，他们愿意到台湾来表达支持的，我们都感到非常的欢迎。那我想中国的打压或者是军事演习不会停止台湾在国际社会上面交朋友，也不会去阻止国际社会上面的这些好朋友到台湾来表达他们的支持。那 Nancy Pelosi 就是佩洛西议长来台湾并不是一个特例，在25年前，美国的另外一位议长Newt Gingrich就来过台湾访问，所以这个是跟美国议员到台湾来访问，这个是非常一致的包括现在就有一位美国的参议员 Marsha Blackburn在台湾访问。那所以这个议员来台湾show their support 就表达他们的支持，这个事情是跟过去这段时间是一致的。所以中国拿佩洛西议长来当作演习的这个借口，那这个就是一个借口而已，这个就是一个借口而已。那我想如果说再看一看中国在过去这一段时间在8月初所做的这个军事演习我们可以了解到这个根本就是中国未来在侵略台湾的一个剧本，他们依照这个剧本来做他们的演练比如说飞弹试射，一共射了11枚飞弹在台湾的周遭。那另外还有大规模的这个海空军的这个演练非常大规模。那另外还有骇客的攻击，包括我们外交部有一段时间我们的网站都被攻击而导致停止运作。那另外还有很多的这些 disinformation 就是假讯息的攻势那另外还有经济的这个胁迫，包括停止100多家台湾的这个公司的很多的产品销到中国去。所以这个整套都是中国他们未来侵略台湾的这个剧本。那这一次的这个演习就是他们侵台剧本的一个演练而已 那这个问题的确对我们来讲是很重要的这个事情，而且不只是台湾是觉得很重要。我相信周遭的国家，或者是说任何一个国家跟台湾有做生意或者是对区域的这个和平稳定有这种has a stake in 的，就是说跟他们有关系的话，他们都应该感到忧心忡忡。如果说看一看过去这30-40年、40-50年，能够维持台海和平与稳定的关键，就是一个 status quo， 包括海峡的中线，那海峡的中线长年以来已经变成那个维持和平与稳定，或者是说表达两岸现状的一个非常具体的象征。可是在8月初的这个演习里面，中国就已经不断的跨越了海峡的中线，不只是他们的空军，包括他们的海军都是一样跨过海峡中线。那到目前为止，他们仍然是在这样子做，所以显然中国的这个动机是要打破台海的现状。打破台海的现状之后，他们要压缩台湾的这个防卫的这个空间所以这个对我们来讲是非常重要的事情。我相信对台海和平与稳定关心的这些人都是一个很重要的这个事情。那另外，如果说我们看到中国的这个演习，在台海的周遭有设置了7个演习区，那这个7个演习区刚好是放在国际航空的非常重要的这个通路上面，而且有2个演习区刚好是在台湾的港口外面。那有1个演习区在高雄港外面，刚好是12海里，还不到12海里。所以显然中国的这个演习会影响到国际航空的安全，也会影响到国际贸易。所以这个是我们感到非常担心的。那我相信所有国家在这一个区域有做生意的都会感受到这个影响。那如果再往回头看一下的话，不好意思，这个时间我花比较多，因为我觉得这个很重要。如果我们往回头再多一点时间来看一下中国的现在破坏台海两岸现状的这个做法，其实不是才昨天、前天或者是3个月而已。从去年，中国人民解放军的发言人就对外说 ，There is no such thing as the median line of the Taiwan Strait， 就是说没有台海中线这一件事情。那在上个月、上个月，在 Shangri-La Dialogue 的时候，中国的外交部发言人也对外说明，就是说台湾海峡不是一个国际水域，台湾海峡属于中国的主权，是中国主权管辖的范围。那可以看得出来，中国的这个想法，它的 motivation 是不断的透露出来。那他们想要去做的，就是说破坏台海的现状，把这种国际社会上面可能的这个干预的这种基础把它给破坏掉。所以这个是一个非常重要的事情。那我再讲最后一点就是说，在裴洛西议长来台湾的时候，中国外交部的发言人不断的去说，美国必须要负起全部责任。但是，如果是美国必须要去负起全部责任的时候，为什么会发动这个对台侵略的这个剧本的演练？所以这个事情是要让我们大家来进一步思考的。那有关于日本我想可能大家都非常的关心，因为这一次的那个演习区中国的那个飞弹有5颗落到日本的 EEZ， 而且那个国际的航空或者是水运的这个通道，可能也会影响到区域的这些国家。那如果说看看中国这一次的那个演习，他们的飞弹试射，或者是说他们的海空的演练只要到台湾的那个东侧的话，那我想这个都是会影响到那个第一岛链的这个防卫。那在第一岛链上面，台湾跟日本是唇齿相依的，2个国家是连在一起的。那中国的这个演练就是要避免其他的国家来介入那个台湾跟中国之间的这种争执。那所以看得出来的话，就是说这一次中国的这个军事演习 是安倍前首相所提出来的台湾有事就是日本有事，就是日美同盟有事的一个最佳的写照。那在这种情况之下，我相信大家都可以感受得到，就是说在中国对台湾的这个威胁越来越严重的时候，相关的国家必须来共同讨论如何来定位什么叫做有事，那如何来相互帮忙。好，非常谢谢你的问题。
谢谢部长，请问铃木支局长还有其他的问题吗？
刚才部长谈到那个日本的安倍前首相的事情，那个因为我是日本的媒体，所以想问趁这个机会想问那个台日关系的事情嘛。安倍前首相7月份那个不幸离世，虽然有人担心台日沟通管道将不如过往顺畅，但是实际上有不少的日本人相当关心台湾，请教今后台湾将如何强化台日关系？部长对日本有什么期待呢？还有日本将在9月份举行安倍前首相的国葬，台湾将派谁出席参加？是否有和日方协调？谢谢。
非常谢谢。我简单的回答就是说，台湾跟日本之间关系是非常的好，而且这个关系好是有非常强健的这个基础。如果说看一看过去这几十年来，台湾的人民跟日本的人民之间的这种感情是非常的浓厚的。不管日本发生了什么事情，那只要有需要台湾人民协助的地方，大家都看到了，台湾人民是非常积极的这个协助比如说在东北震灾的时候，台湾的人民的这个协助让日本人都讲到现在。那同样的，我们台湾这边有任何需要协助的时候，那日本的人民、日本的政府都不吝提供。或者是说，像去年的那个我们需要疫苗的时候，日本政府就提供了420万剂的那个 AstraZeneca 的这个疫苗，这个都让台湾人民感受非常的强烈，就是日本就是一个好朋友。所以在这个非常强健的基础之上，我们台湾跟日本是沟通是非常顺畅的。我们在日本有非常多的朋友，那日本的这些重要的人物在台湾也非常多的朋友。那如果说需要沟通的话，永远都会有沟通的这个管道，那沟通的大门也都是敞开的。那有关于台日关系如何来强化的这个议题那我们也不断的公开来说明，有一些是不适合公开来讲的，但是能够公开说的就是说，我们台湾跟日本之间的确是一个享有共同价值的伙伴那在经贸关系上面也是非常的密切。那人民跟人民之间的这种关系情感也都是非常的密切，在这个基础之上我们应该更加来讨论，看看如何有其他的这个方式来强化彼此的这个关系。那我相信，只要有这个意愿的话的确我们就可以来朝向这一方面来努力。那这个是我们努力的目标。我相信日本也有很多朋友也有这一个认知包括最近来台湾的这个谷物奎司众议员，或者是木原忍众议员，他们也都有这个认知。那他们来台湾的时候跟我们讨论的也都非常的好，也都非常的深入。那安倍前首相对台湾非常的友好，那我们台湾的人民对于他的不幸过世是感到非常的不幸，也感到非常的不舍。但是安倍首相他的精神是会被台湾的人民和日本的人民所共同继承，所以他的精神还是会在。比如说他最重要的 legacy 就是 Free and Open Indo-Pacific 自由开放的这个印太区域。到目前为止，除了台湾不断的在阐述自由开放的印太区域，看连澳洲美国，甚至越来越多的这种像加拿大或者是欧洲国家都在讨论自由开放的这个印太区域，这个就是安倍首相最好的 legacy。那至于9月27号的这种安倍首相的这个国葬，我们已经接到的这种日本的通知。那我们如果说有决定的话，我们会对外公开来说明。好，谢谢你。
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, 李木支局长. Now the floor is open for further questions. 王若雨 from Wall Street Journal, please.
Hello. Thanks for having us here. This is Joey Wang with the Wall Street Journal. We've seen actually quite a few, guests coming to Taiwan in the past couple of weeks, and I'm just wondering, what's the biggest challenge for you guys, have been? I mean, assuming you guys must have been exhausted, right? So that's my first question, and the second question is, would like to know, what's the Taiwan's biggest needs from the U.S. these days? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. For the first question, visitors coming to Taiwan is a joy, not just for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also for the Taiwanese people. You can see from the reaction of the regular people, even regular people on the street, their reactions to Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. It's overwhelming. And also to the visitors from other countries, the people here in Taiwan enjoy those visits. It's a show of support. It shows that Taiwan is not dangling out there alone, dealing with that big bully across the Taiwan Strait. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will continue to work very hard to make sure that the visitors planning to come to Taiwan are welcomed. But of course, we have limited number of staff in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I only have a limited appetite, and therefore entertaining or receiving all these important guests from the international community sometimes can be very demanding on our manpower. But no matter what, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very proud to be able to show to the Taiwanese people that we have supporters out there in the international community. And all these international community friends, they are not coerced by China. They still want to come and show their support to Taiwan. But whenever there are important visitors come to Taiwan, the Chinese reaction is always not very friendly. And under these kinds of circumstances, our Ministry of National Defense needs to work extra hard to make sure that our water and our airspace is safely defended. And we have demonstrated throughout all this period, including the exercises the Chinese conducted in the first week of August, we are absolutely determined to defend ourselves. And our Air Force, our Navy, and also our other service members are in high morale. And they understand their sacred mission of defending our country. And the people here in Taiwan also show that they are absolutely determined to defend themselves. And this is the way we try to show to the international community, also show to the Chinese that Taiwan, or defending Taiwan, is our responsibility. And we have the will and we have the determination to defend ourselves. And talk about the need from the United States. We are in constant discussions with the United States, and there's a lot we would need from the United States. And I'm sure the U.S. government understands it very well. For example, we need deeper economic relations between Taiwan and the United States. And there's already a trade initiative for the 21st century trade. And it's being under negotiations. And there's already a timetable, a roadmap to conclude the negotiations. And that is exactly what we need. And we will work very hard to make sure that the negotiations are concluded. And on the defense matters, we have been working very closely with the United States. We want to procure more defensive weapons from the United States. And we also need to work or discuss with the United States in depth concerning Taiwan's defense. And that has been going on. And we will continue to do this. And another thing is that the United States not only has the administration, but also has a legislative branch. And we want to continue to work closely with the members of the Congress on both sides of the aisle to make sure they understand Taiwan, they understand the need of Taiwan, they understand the need for Taiwan to continue to receive their support. And other matters would not be governmental, but on the policy community in general. We want to continue to work with the policy community in Washington, D.C. or in other parts of the United States to make sure that they understand Taiwan. There's no misunderstandings between the two sides. And we also want to ensure that they will continue to show their support to Taiwan. You probably noticed that there's a group of Harvard scholars this morning. And as a result of the discussions with them, I think they were very impressed with Taiwan, not only in Taiwan's economic ability, but also in Taiwan's strong will to defend ourselves. And they are very impressed, and I'm sure when they go back to the United States, they will continue to show their support for Taiwan. So this is just one of the examples. We want to make sure that the U.S. Government, Congress, and the regular policy community will continue to show their support for Taiwan, and that is our mission. We'll continue to work very hard.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Royu. Sebastian from Politiken, please.
Hello, Sebastian Kiltos from Politiken in Denmark. Continuing on this question, you seem to have a quite good hold on the political elites of the West at present. In Denmark, also Danish politicians are planning to go or hoping to go to Taiwan later this fall. However, I think many Danish people still see Taiwan primarily through the lens of great power struggle between the US and China. So my question is, what is your message to the Danish people, and I guess people of Europe and the world, to make them truly care and understand about the plight of Taiwan? And related to that, what are the Taiwanese government doing to strengthen people-to-people ties between Taiwan and people of Denmark and Europe and the world? Thank you.
This is a very good question. It's also a broad question, not just on Denmark specifically, but also a broader perspective on our relations with Europe. Ever since I came to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I myself and also our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been working very hard on our relations with Europe. And in the past several years, you have already seen the significant improvement of relations between Taiwan and Europe. Sometimes you may want to look at some symbolic steps or event to understand the substantive relations between Taiwan and European countries. For instance, in 2018, I was invited to speak at the Democracy Summit of Democracy in Denmark. And as far as I know, that was the first time Taiwanese foreign minister was allowed to make a public speech in Europe. And then in last year, I visited Slovakia and the Czech Republic and also Brussels. And I gave open speech in Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And these are some of the highlights of the improvement of relations between Taiwan and the European countries. And beneath these symbolic events, you can see that there's a lot going on in between Taiwan and European countries. And that is the result of our hard effort. But it is also resulted from the natural affinity between Taiwan and Central and Eastern European countries. The Central and Eastern European countries, their elites or their scholars or regular people, they told me that they still remember the days they were under communism. And therefore, for those people, they understand how it was like to be under authoritarianism, to be under communist rule. And therefore, there is a natural sympathy for Taiwan that is harassed by communists across the Taiwan Strait. So it is easy for them to show support for Taiwan. And it is easy for them to make an extra effort to show their support for Taiwan. And in the course of last couple of years, you saw President of the Czech Senate visited Taiwan. And you also saw delegations after delegations of the Slovakia came to Taiwan and want to strengthen relations with Taiwan. And it's not only the V4 countries, it's also the Baltic states. They are very willing to engage Taiwan. For instance, we have already received vice ministerial level delegations from Lithuania for the last year. There will be more visitors coming from Lithuania. And you can see from the Lithuanian senior officials' reaction to the Chinese military threat against Taiwan, it is also very heartwarming. For example, Landsbergis, the foreign minister of Lithuania, wrote an op-ed in the Telegraph saying in a very strong way that the world should not allow Taiwan to be the second Ukraine. And I think the Taiwanese people remember that. And in order for us to reciprocate the goodwill, you can see the Taiwanese people, the regular people, they want to work extra hard to make sure that the trade relations, cultural relations, tourism, and etc. is strengthened because of these engagements. But of course, elite is always very important. And we will continue to invite elites, especially parliamentarians from the European countries, to be able to visit Taiwan. And that is a mission of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Minister and Sebastian. Huizhong Wu from AP, please.
Hi, my name is Huizhong from the Associated Press. Minister Wu, a question for you about kind of your messaging abroad. I think your Twitter presence is very widely known, and I respect you for it. You know, given you have wielded Twitter very effectively. But I had a question just about kind of your messaging on China. You're known in Taiwan for having broken with tradition along the foreign ministry, for being very outspoken and loud, and you know, sometimes to the point of especially pointing out China's authoritarianism and I guess its scope abroad. And recently you said in an interview with India Today, and I quote from just a tiny section, you said, "Look at Sri Lanka, how China has bring down Sri Lanka to its collapse." So the question is just kind of about, at this moment of great tension, right, between China, US, Taiwan, and when President Tsai very much pushes this agenda of, you know, we are restrained. We definitely will not bow down, but we are restrained and we will not be provocative. Critics would arguably this is inflammatory language. How do you see your role in putting out this kind of rhetoric? And how does it mesh with, you know, President Tsai's overall alignment of restraint? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I always look at myself as the government spokesperson. You know, we used to have a government agency called Government Information Office, GIO. And the GIO director serves as Taiwan government's spokesperson. But we don't have GIO anymore. And part of the GIO operation is merged with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And therefore, I look at myself as not only the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also the spokesperson for the Taiwanese government. And therefore, it is important for Taiwan's voice to be heard in international community. And I need to play that role to make sure that my voice is heard in the international community. And for your information, you know, I have conducted interviews or received interviews by international media quite often. And the reason is very simple. It is that I need to let Taiwan's situation to be known to the international community. And Twitter messages or Taiwan releases coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs sometimes can be seen as rather critical of China. But if you look at my Twitter messages or the statement coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which are critical of China, they are responsive. They are the responses to the Chinese provocations. And these kinds of statements, we know where we need to stand for, where the limits are, and therefore we look at the responses from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or from myself is in line, perfectly in line with our way of dealing with China. That is confident and calm and responsible. We understand perfectly well what kind of statement is going to provoke a cross-strait crisis. And you don't see that at all in our responses. And for those international press briefings or international media interviews, I need to say something that they can relate to. You know, in the case of Sri Lanka, it's sitting right next to India. And if I use Sri Lanka as an example, it's very easy for the Indian audience to understand the Chinese motivation. You know, I talk about this as well. You know, Chinese motivation is not limited to Taiwan. They have ambition over the East China Sea, South China Sea, even beyond the first island chain. They also set up strings of pearls in the Indian Ocean. That kind of a line has been repeated, and that is telling the truth about the Chinese motivation and the Chinese operation far beyond Taiwan. And for that matter, I would say I will continue to speak the truth.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Hui Zhong. The next question would be from, how about Zhong En from New York Times?
Hi, this is John from the New York Times. My first question is following what you said about Taiwan-Japan relationship. We know in the past, like both you and President Tsai have called for Taiwan-Japan security dialogue, especially between the officials level. I wonder if Pelosi's visit and the subsequent, the military exercise by China has sort of like reignited that urgency. That's my first question. And the second one is, because you earlier commented on the defense needs of Taiwan, and that you will, that Taiwan will continue to ask for more weapons, essentially, from the United States. There seems to be an increasing mismatch between what Taiwan wants and what U.S. wants to give. From the U.S. side, it's, it's the asymmetric weapons. From Taiwan side, conventional weapons. What's your view on that?
Thank you very much for that question, John. If you look at the Chinese military exercises at the beginning of August, I'm sure you can feel the same way that we feel as well. The Chinese designation of the zones for exercises happen to be on the very busy international transportation routes or the routes of international trade. And the kinds of interruption, even it is just for exercises, it's going to have impact on the international trade and also the international communication. And therefore, the real impact is not just going to be on Taiwan. All the countries that rely on the transportation routes along the Taiwan Strait or surrounding Taiwan is going to be impacted. And look at the Chinese missiles that landed in the area that claim to be Japan's, or Japan claims to be their EEZs. And the practice of that seem to be trying to deter future possible intervention by other countries in the cross-strait conflict. It's a practice of A2AD, anti-access and area denial type of warfare. So you can see that the Chinese military exercises at the beginning of August, it's a threat not just to Taiwan, but also to regional members. And under these kinds of circumstances, we need to think deeper on how we can work together. And sometimes it's hard for me to speak out in open on those security matters in between Taiwan and Japan. But I can tell you that this is a thing that we care quite a lot about. You probably have heard repeatedly from the Japanese politicians or from the former Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Abe. He said that if there's any crisis over Taiwan, it's going to be a crisis for Japan. It's going to be a crisis for U.S.-Japan alliance relationship. And therefore, we understand the cares of the Japanese people concerning the safety of Taiwan. And we will continue to work very hard in that regard to make sure that the security relations between Taiwan and Japan is good. I would also like to point out that the Japanese government's position with regard to Taiwan has been very consistent. They talk about Taiwan as an important partner, sharing values and interests. And you can see that is a solid foundation for the bilateral relations to move further. And beyond the traditional security relations, I don't know whether you noticed that we have a mechanism is called GCTF, Global Cooperation and Training Framework. And under GCTF, we discuss a lot of issues that are non-traditional, but they are security. For example, cyber attacks or disinformation, maritime safety, energy security, and etc. These are non-traditional security matters, probably just as important as traditional security matters. And under GCTF, Japan has already become a co-organizer of the event. And therefore, on these non-traditional matters, Taiwan and Japan have been working very closely with each other. And this is a very good foundation for us to move further.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, John.
Second part to the question of Taiwan's needs for the U.S. In providing arms. You know, I happen to have the TRA with me, just one phrase. And you can see that the responsibility under, or the requirement of the U.S. government under the Taiwan Relations Act is Section 2 clause, the 5th clause, to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. And therefore, under TRA, the United States is highly committed to the defense relations with Taiwan. And we have been discussing with each other on how we should procure arms from the United States, or what kind of arms the United States is going to provide to Taiwan. That kind of discussion has never stopped. And I would like to say that we really appreciate the U.S. commitment in line with the Taiwan Relations Act. And for the details of discussions on the arms procurement is not appropriate for me to discuss out in open, not just because I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs, not Minister of National Defense, but the reality that the substantive engagement between Taiwan government officials and the U.S. government officials, you know, we meet from time to time, but for the content, where we did it, when we did it, we never talk about it openly.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, John. The next question, Will Ripley from CNN.
Thank you. Do you worry that United States lawmakers who might lack some of the knowledge of the nuance of statements, as you mentioned, that would infuriate or cause some sort of a cross-strait crisis, do you worry that some of the lawmakers visiting might inadvertently make a statement that could ignite a crisis? And do you feel that the U.S. might also be changing the status quo with the billions of dollars in unprecedented levels of weapons sales and also the increasingly high-level visits? Are both sides actually changing the status quo as opposed to just China?
For the first part of your question, Will, is whether we are concerned about the lawmakers coming from the United States that would make a statement or do something that would cause cross-strait tension. If you look at the track record of streams of American visitors, congressional visitors coming to Taiwan, I don't see that. What I see is a very firm support coming from the Capitol Hill of the United States. They want to come to Taiwan and show their support. And indeed, they were here in Taiwan and they show their support to Taiwan. They want to show not just for some, also try to discuss with us to see what kind of legislations are needed for them to be able to adopt so that Taiwan's position can be further strengthened. So that is what I see. And therefore, we'll continue to welcome the U.S. lawmakers to visit Taiwan to show their support and discuss with us on what kind of matters that will be substantively helpful to Taiwan. So I don't see any problem in that regard. And the second question with regard to the status quo, I think we need to discuss a little bit about what the status quo is. The status quo is that Taiwan and the People's Republic of China have no jurisdiction over each other. We are run by ourselves. We have a president that is publicly and democratically elected. We have a parliament that is also publicly and democratically elected. We have a military to defend ourselves. And we have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs to issue visa and passport. And the Taiwanese government exercises exclusive jurisdiction over the territory under our control. And the PRC government has never, for any single day, has any jurisdiction over Taiwan. And that is the status quo. No matter how much China is trying to claim that Taiwan is part of the PRC, it is not in line with the reality on the ground. Taiwan, the reality is that Taiwan is run by itself. Taiwan is substantively existing in the international community, and we are capable of engaging relations with other countries. And therefore, for Taiwan to acquire sufficient amount of defensive articles from the United States or from other countries, that has become part of this Taiwan's existence. And we have been discussing with the United States or other countries for that matter. And it has nothing to do with whether the status quo is violated or not. But in contrast, what you see from the Chinese actions, especially after the beginning of August, they started doing the exercises along the Taiwan Strait or around Taiwan. What they tried to do is to stop the Taiwan Strait from becoming international water, or from being an international water. And that kind of exercises is a trampoline on the status quo. And as I said at the beginning, the medium line of the Taiwan Strait is a high symbol of the cross-strait status quo. And the Chinese government not only claimed that there is no such thing as a medium line of the Taiwan Strait, they continue to send their jet fighters to cross the medium line of the Taiwan Strait. And that is the breaking of the status quo. And that kind of activity should not be accepted by Taiwan or the international community. I think we should work together to restore the status quo across the Taiwan Strait to make sure that the peace and stability will continue to exist. President Tsai has said something even before her election as the president of Taiwan. She said this back in 2015 in her visit to Washington, D.C., and that line continued to be valid. That line is the status quo serves the best interest of all parties concerned, and I will continue to say that.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Will. The next question would be Will Glasgow from Australia.
Thanks so much. And great news to hear there'll be more briefings from other ministries. I think that's a terrific idea, so great job. Following very closely on what other Will said, right now, John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor of Donald Trump, is in Australia. And he's just given an interview with my paper, The Australian, where he said he expects all the Republican candidates, all the serious ones, in the 2024 presidency, except for his former boss, Donald Trump, will be advocating for the official recognition of Taiwan and also the end of strategic ambiguity and embracing strategic clarity. Now, as we just said, that'll be quite a change in the status quo. So my question is, as the spokesperson for the Taiwanese government, does the Taiwan government support what John Bolton's saying the Republican candidates are going to do? I mean, one of them, Mike Pompeo, did as much here in Taiwan. Does the Taiwanese government support that? Do they want the US Democrats to join them and make that a bipartisan position? Or would the Taiwanese government, like the Australian government and other shared partners of Taiwan and America, to tell the Republican candidates, calm down, this could be really dangerous? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And this is a very challenging one. John Bolton is a very good friend of mine, and his support for Taiwan is always unwavering. And that kind of support is always highly appreciated. I have no details of his remarks in Australia, but I think he mentioned something like that previously. And for the important visitors coming from the United States, from the Republican side, we already saw former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He was here in Taiwan, and was here in Taiwan just to show support to the Taiwanese people. And there's already a news report that he's planning to come again. But as long as we have friends who are willing to come, they are always welcome. The relations between Taiwan and the United States, especially coming from the U.S. side, the relations have always been governed by the Taiwan Relations Act. And it is said very clearly, and we have a tremendous rooms of exercise or maneuvers for the relations between Taiwan and the United States. Still remember, I don't have it with me, but if you have a chance to look at the Article 4 of the Taiwan Relations Act, in absence of the diplomatic relations in between Taiwan and the United States, whenever the law of the United States mention about the state, the nations, government, or other similar entities, such law will apply to Taiwan. And therefore, with the existence of the Taiwan Relations Act, the Taiwanese government and the U.S. government's relations are already very substantive. And the lack of diplomatic relations does not prevent Taiwanese government from engaging the U.S. government in a very close way. And as far as I can tell, I can tell you very frankly that the communication or engagement between the two governments had already been very close. And as far as I can see, it would only be closer than before. So this is what we have been looking at. But for the U.S. Domestic policy debate, that is something that we don't want to get into. We have friends from the Republicans, and we also have good friends from the Democratic side. And what they have debated on is always trying to show their support. Fully respect what they have been saying, but what they try to show their support to Taiwan is highly appreciated. By the same token, is for the Australian government who want to engage with Taiwan substantially, I think they have been doing that, and that kind of support or that kind of engagement is highly appreciated by the Taiwanese people, by the Taiwanese government already. And we will continue to look for ways that Taiwan and Australia can engage in more areas of cooperation in trade, in people-to-people ties, in tourism, or other matters. And security matter is probably a very important one. If you look at the Chinese expansion in the Pacific, these will probably bring the attention to the Australian government. The Chinese military exercises breaking out of the first island chain has become very frequent. And sometimes their military exercises have gone to the central part of the Pacific. And they grabbed two of our diplomatic allies back in 2019, the Solomon Islands and Kiribati. And look at what China has been trying to do in the Solomon Islands. They signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands. And that got our Australian friends very nervous because the Solomon Islands is right at the doorstep of Australia. And under these kinds of circumstances, the like-minded partners, Australia included, need to think about how we should cooperate with each other to prevent authoritarianism from expanding further.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Will.
the Australian government and the Australian people really want to help. There's huge support you see in surveys for how to help Taiwan, but there is confusion about what is helpful. And so there are people who are very expert in Taiwan in Australia who think that those comments by John Bolton are really unhelpful. And like Will Ripley was saying, there's comments from less experienced people that seem to be very destabilizing. But these aren't inexperienced people. These are people who very much understand the situation, saying the US wants to move towards that policy. So for my Australian audience, what does Taiwan want? Does Taiwan encourage that? Does it want that to happen? Or is it right that people in Australia who are expert on Taiwan are concerned about it?
Let me try to mention again about our position. We try not to engage in debates in the internal or domestic debate in the United States or in Australia. That's not our role. Our purpose is just trying to improve relations, and based upon the current situation, the areas of cooperation is something that we will work very hard on, and therefore that is our position. But with regard to Australia, what kind of help is going to be helpful to Taiwan? I think that's more than clear. We have already seen the Australians show interest to Taiwan. The Australian journals, they are all very eager, the Australian included. They are very eager to speak with me, just to hear Taiwan's side story. And there's also Australian decision makers who want to speak about Taiwan, especially Taiwan's international participation. And they want to caution the United States, they want to caution China on destabilizing the area or threaten a democratic Taiwan. And all these kinds of efforts are appreciated. But when it comes to the defense of Taiwan, that is what I have repeated again and again, and I will do it again. The defense of Taiwan is our own responsibility. And if we are not determined to defend ourselves, we don't have any right to ask others to help Taiwan. And under the current circumstances, we have already shown a tremendous degree of our determination to defend ourselves. And what we need from the international community is to continue to speak out in support of Taiwan. For example, to speak out in support of Taiwan's international participation. The international space is a very important issue for Taiwan. So for the Australian government to continue to speak out the importance of Taiwan's participation in organizations such as WHO is highly appreciated. And we also appreciate the fact that the Australian government continue to speak on the peace and stability issue of the Taiwan Strait with other governments, for example, the United States, Japan, European countries, and etc. And that kind of statement in cautioning China for coercing Taiwan is also very important for the Taiwanese people. And let me just say one more thing, and I will stop on Australia. That is the natural affinity in between Taiwan and Australia. We both democracies, and we both love freedoms. And therefore, when we see that Australia is coerced economically by China, there's a reaction coming from Taiwan. And the reality is that the Taiwanese people will show the kinds of solidarity with Australia by buying Australian products. And it's the same with Lithuania, with the Czech Republic, and etc. And tell you a little bit a story about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm not trying to be unfair to other countries, but ever since China banned Australian red wines, we have been serving Australian red wine in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We think it is the right thing to do. We think it's a show of solidarity, and we think it's an important gesture to show to the Australians that we care about the situation they are in. And because of this, we want a lot of friendship, even though we are not asking for any kind of a return, but we want a lot of friendship coming from Australia.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Will. Catherine Hill from Financial Times.
Thank you for taking my question. There's been a lot of analysis of what China is actually, or how China is actually trying to achieve their goals through the recent military action. And you've said it's an attempt to change the status quo. You also referenced the Chinese statements that the Taiwan Strait is not international waters. Now, if this were happening around any other country, I guess one of the tools of choice to push back would be international law. You can use, for example, the UNCLOS to argue that China violated that with the setting of the closure zones. And I noticed that the Ministry of National Defense actually tried to do exactly that. During the exercises, they brought out an official with their legal department and referred to the UN Charter and to UNCLOS and said that there were Chinese violations. Now, but we're in a situation where the large majority of countries do not recognize Taiwan's statehood. So a lot of things that apply to UN member countries, people might argue that it wouldn't apply to Taiwan. So I wonder if you have looked into any kind of legal avenues or options to counter this Chinese salami slicing. That's because they have for them this is lawfare as well. They have a legal goal and they want to establish a certain new status quo that would underpin their sovereignty claim. So I wonder if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with your legal expertise, if you see any options to use that to push back. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for that question. We do look at the international legal aspect of the Chinese military exercises or their claim of the Taiwan Strait as their own water rather than international water. And if you remember the statement I made in the international press conference, we spoke about the Chinese actions and the designation of the zones for exercises is violated, it seriously violated all the rights that we enjoy under the international law. And therefore you can see that we have studied the international law, and UNCLOS is just one of them, and including the Taiwan Strait being claimed by China as its own internal water or under its sovereignty. It is a violation of what has been going on for a long, long time. The international transportation routes going through the Taiwan Strait has been going on for decades. And therefore, for China to claim that this is its internal water, it's a violation of the international practice. And I don't think that the international community is going to accept this. And we also see the Chinese are using the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 as a legal basis to claim that Taiwan is their internal matters, and therefore any other country that wants to speak on the issue of Taiwan or peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is a violation of China's internal matters. And therefore this is an issue we are also trying to raise the awareness that China has been over-interpreting the resolution 2758, and you can be assured that the legal aspect of the Chinese military exercises or their claims of the Taiwan Strait or designation of the exercises zones are all being under serious study. But most important of all, it is the status quo. The status quo, as I said a little bit earlier, serves the best interest of all parties concerned. And the status quo is able to keep the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait for decades, and violating the status quo. Most important thing for the international community to be aware of is that China has been violating the status quo by claiming that the Taiwan Strait is its internal water, or conducting military exercises by breaking the medium line of the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Catherine. Some more questions. This Korean daily, Elda, please, Elda Ling.
Thank you for taking my question. Mr. Minister, I would like to know what would Taiwan do to enhance the ties with South Korea to help ease geopolitical tensions. What areas do you see opportunities for cooperation other than both competition in many ways, such as baseball games? Thank you.
Well, I think it's already over 11, so I'll answer this question and come to this side because I saw a lot of hands keep raising, so, and you will have the last one. About Taiwan-South Korea relations, it's been very good people-to-people relations. Before the pandemic, there's a lot of Koreans who want to come to Taiwan and enjoy the natural beauty or to do the sightseeing, to engage with the Taiwanese young people, and etc. And it is the same coming from Taiwan side. There's so many people coming from Taiwan who want to visit Korea because they are fascinated by the Korean culture, dramas, and also their music and etc. So that kind of exchanges between Taiwan and Korea paved a very solid foundation for the two sides to continue to move forward. And for the Korean politicians, especially coming from the Korean parliament, there are quite a few of them that are very supportive of Taiwan, and they are more than welcome to take an opportunity to come and see us and discuss in more details on how we can move further in the bilateral relations. But we also understand where the Korean government is when it comes to China. They do a lot of business with China, and therefore, when it comes to Taiwan, they are always very cautious. We can understand that, but that should not prevent the Korean government from engaging Taiwanese government more, and we have the full intention to engage more with the Korean government, either on trade issues or security issues or on other matters that are mutually beneficial.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Ada. The last question will be from 德通社一词.
Thank you, Minister. I just have a quick question. You just mentioned Europe, and I wonder if you want Germany as a major European power to take the lead in the EU to get more recognition and international living space for Taiwan. Thank you. International space for Taiwan.
I thought it was baseball league. Well, thank you very much for that question. As I said a little bit earlier, we focus on our relations with Central and Eastern European countries as well as Northern European countries. The trade relations between Taiwan and those countries are going very well, and the political relations are also going very well. As I say, I was able to go to Copenhagen, go to Bratislava, and also Prague for open events, and there are several other capitals that I can also visit, and this is something that I don't see in the other parts of the world. So we'll continue to explore possibilities of our relations, more substantive relations with Central and Eastern European countries, and this is our primary focus in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But that doesn't mean that we don't care about Taiwan-Germany relations or Taiwan-France relations. On the contrary, we think the relations with Germany or with France are also very important. And the substantive relations between Taiwan and these two traditional powers in Europe have gone very well already. Look at the type of exchanges between Taiwan and those countries. They are already being very good. Look at trade and investment. It's very substantial. And we will continue to look for ways to substantiate it or to make the relations even more substantial. But for the international space issue, I would say that Germany, France, UK, and etc., the traditional powers of Europe, have been very supportive of Taiwan's international participation. Every time when the WHO is rolling along, Germany, France, UK, and etc. have always been on the forefront in supporting Taiwan's participation in the World Health Organization. And look at their statement. They're coming from higher and higher level officials. So that kind of support is highly appreciated, and we'll continue to work with them to make sure that they continue to support Taiwan's international participation.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Yu-Tzu. So now I think today's briefing has come to an end. A lot of good questions and great and candid answers. And we're looking forward to doing more of this kind of a briefing with the minister or other governmental officials. Thank you again for your participation. I'd like to conclude the briefing by wishing everybody a great day and stay healthy. Thank you.
And also have a good weekend. I know there's still